Atha for making my sister pay back my daughter? Brooke's love for books was not just a hobby, it was a passion that had shaped her identity since she was a little girl. At the age of 5, she had stumbled upon her first chapter book, a worn-out copy of a classic children's novel that her grandmother had gifted her. From that moment, Brooke was hooked. The way the words danced on the pages, the way the stories transported her to worlds far beyond her own, ignited a fire within her that never dimmed. Over the years, her collection grew into a treasure trove of literary wonders, each book carefully selected, cherished, and preserved. Her shelves were a testament to her dedication, lined with limited editions, signed copies, and rare finds that she had hunted down with the determination of a seasoned collector. Brooke's allowance, which she received every week without fail, was rarely spent on the frivolities that many teenagers indulged in. While her peers splurged on trendy clothes, makeup, or the latest gadgets, Brooke's eyes were always drawn to the glossy covers and crisp pages of new releases. She had a knack for discovering hidden gems, often pre-ordering books months in advance to ensure she secured a first edition or a special release. Her room was a sanctuary, a place where the scent of paper and ink mingled with the soft glow of her reading lamp, creating an atmosphere of quiet contentment. Recently, Brooke had been eagerly anticipating the release of a special edition of one of her favorite novels. It was a book she already owned, but this version was different, bound in luxurious leather, with gold foil embossing and exclusive illustrations that brought the story to life in a whole new way. She had saved every penny of her allowance for months, foregoing outings with friends and even skipping her usual coffee runs to ensure she could afford it. The day it arrived, she had practically floated home from the bookstore, clutching the bag to her chest as if it contained the most precious thing in the world. She spent hours that evening carefully unwrapping it, running her fingers over the intricate cover, and flipping through the pages with a reverence that bordered on sacred. This book, like all the others in her collection, was more than just an object to Brooke. It was a piece of her soul, a fragment of the countless hours she had spent lost in stories that had shaped her dreams, her values, and her understanding of the world. Her books were her companions, her teachers, and her escape. They were a reflection of who she was, and she guarded them with a fierce protectiveness that only those who truly loved books could understand. Little did she know, however, that this very passion would soon become the center of a storm that would test not only her resilience but also the bonds of her family. As Brooke carefully placed the new special edition on her shelf, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had worked hard for this, and it was a tangible reminder of her dedication. But the tranquility of her book-filled sanctuary was about to be shattered in a way she could never have anticipated. The events that would unfold in the coming days would challenge her in ways she had never imagined, forcing her to confront not only the loss of her cherished possessions but also the complexities of family dynamics and the harsh realities of betrayal. The stage was set, though Brooke was blissfully unaware of the turmoil that lay ahead. Her world, so carefully curated and lovingly maintained, was about to be turned upside down, and the echoes of what was to come would ripple far beyond the confines of her room. The books that had always been her refuge were about to become the catalyst for a drama that would leave everyone involved questioning their choices, their values, and the very nature of forgiveness. The Saturday afternoon had begun with the kind of casual ease that often accompanies family visits. Lindsay, my younger sister, had called earlier in the week to suggest they come over, and I had agreed, eager to catch up after what felt like months of missed connections. Life had a way of getting busy, and though we lived relatively close to each other, our schedules rarely aligned. Lindsay arrived with her daughter, Mariah, in tow, and the atmosphere was light as we exchanged hugs and settled into the living room. Mariah, now 13, had grown into a spirited teenager, her energy palpable as she bounced on the balls of her feet, clearly restless after the car ride. As we chatted, Mariah's eyes kept darting toward the staircase, her curiosity about Brooke's room evident. Brooke, my 16-year-old daughter, was out running an errand, and I knew how much Mariah admired her older cousin. Brooke's room was a haven of books, art, and the kind of organized chaos that only a true book lover could understand. It was a space that Brooke guarded with a quiet but firm sense of ownership, and I had always respected that. When Mariah made a move toward the stairs, I gently stopped her, explaining that Brooke wasn't home yet but would be back shortly. I suggested she wait downstairs with us, and though she pouted slightly, she complied, plopping down on the couch and launching into a detailed account of how school was going. Mariah's stories were a mix of teenage drama and academic triumphs, and I listened with a smile, nodding along as she recounted her latest adventures. She was a bright girl, full of potential, but there was a restlessness about her that sometimes made me uneasy. She had a tendency to act impulsively, a trait that Lindsay often dismissed as just a phase. Still, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of concern as Mariah's gaze wandered toward the staircase again, her fingers tapping impatiently against the arm of the couch. After about 10 minutes of conversation, Mariah abruptly announced that she needed to use the bathroom. Our house has 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs, not including the en-suite in the master bedroom. Unfortunately, the downstairs bathroom had been acting up lately, with a stubborn leak that had proven difficult to fix. I had called a plumber earlier in the week, but they hadn't been able to come out yet, so I had temporarily closed off the downstairs bathroom to avoid further damage. When Mariah asked to use it, I explained the situation and told her it was fine to use the one upstairs. She nodded and headed up the stairs, her footsteps echoing softly as she disappeared from view. At the time, I didn't think much of it. The upstairs bathroom was just down the hall from Brooke's room, but I trusted Mariah to respect the boundaries we had set. Brooke's room was off limits without her permission, a rule that had been in place for years and one that Mariah was well aware of. Still, as I sat there chatting with Lindsay, a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Mariah had glanced toward Brooke's room earlier, or maybe it was the faint sound of a door creaking open that I thought I heard from upstairs. But I brushed it aside, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. Lindsay and I continued our conversation, catching up on everything from work to family gossip. She mentioned how Mariah had been struggling a bit in school lately, her grades slipping as she became more interested in socializing than studying. Lindsay seemed unconcerned, brushing it off as typical teenage behavior, but I couldn't help but feel a pang of worry. Mariah was at that age where the line between curiosity and mischief could blur, and I hoped she wasn't getting into trouble. Meanwhile, upstairs, Mariah had finished in the bathroom but found herself lingering in the hallway. The door to Brooke's room was slightly ajar, and the temptation to peek inside was too strong to resist. She knew she wasn't supposed to go in, but the allure of Brooke's book collection was irresistible. Mariah had always been fascinated by the way Brooke talked about her books, her eyes lighting up as she described the stories and characters that had captured her heart. To Mariah, Brooke's room was like a treasure trove, a place filled with secrets waiting to be discovered. Pushing the door open a little wider, Mariah stepped inside, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of the shelves lined with books. The room was neat but lived in, with a cozy reading nook by the window and a desk cluttered with notebooks and pens. Mariah's gaze fell on the new special edition book that Brooke had recently acquired, its cover gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the window. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the spine, and before she knew it, she had pulled it off the shelf. The book felt heavy in her hands, the leather binding smooth and cool to the touch. Mariah flipped through the pages, her curiosity growing with each turn. She had never seen a book like this before, and the illustrations were unlike anything she had ever encountered. But as she continued to flip through the pages, her excitement began to wane. The book wasn't what she had expected. The story was dense, the language complex, and the illustrations, while beautiful, didn't hold her attention for long. Frustration bubbled up inside her, and before she could stop herself, she tore a page out of the book, the sound of ripping paper startling her back to reality. For a moment, Mariah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't meant to do it, it had been an impulsive act, born out of boredom and a lack of understanding. But as she stared at the torn page in her hand, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over her. It was as if the act of destruction had given her a sense of control, a way to assert herself in a world where she often felt overlooked. Emboldened, she tore another page, and then another, the sound of ripping paper filling the room. By the time Brooke returned home, the damage was done. The special edition book lay in ruins, its pages scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Mariah stood in the middle of the room, her hands trembling as she realized the gravity of what she had done. But it was too late to take it back. The sound of Brooke's footsteps on the stairs sent a jolt of panic through her, and she quickly tried to gather the torn pages, shoving them back into the book in a desperate attempt to hide the evidence. But it was no use. When Brooke walked into her room and saw the destruction, her scream echoed through the house, a sound so raw and anguished that it sent chills down my spine. I rushed upstairs, my heart pounding, and when I saw the scene before me, I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I had ever experienced. Brooke was in tears, her hands shaking as she picked up the torn pages, while Mariah stood frozen in place, her face pale with guilt. The next few moments were a blur. I demanded an explanation, my voice sharp with fury, but Mariah could only stammer out a weak apology. Lindsay, who had followed me upstairs, tried to defend her daughter, but I wasn't having it. The damage was done, and there was no excuse for what had happened. As I looked at Brooke, her face streaked with tears, I knew that this was more than just about a book. It was about respect, boundaries, and the consequences of one's actions. And as the tension in the room reached a boiling point, I realized that this incident was about to change everything. The scream that tore through the house was a sound I would never forget, a raw, guttural cry of pain and disbelief that sent a jolt of panic through my entire body. I had been in the middle of a conversation with Lindsay, discussing the latest family gossip, when the sound shattered the calm of the afternoon. My heart leapt into my throat as I bolted from the couch, taking the stairs 2 at a time, my mind racing with fear. Brooke was not one to raise her voice, let alone scream, and the sheer intensity of her cry filled me with dread. When I reached her room, the scene that greeted me was nothing short of devastating. The door was wide open, and Brooke stood in the center of the room, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her hands trembled as she clutched a handful of torn pages, her eyes wide with shock and anguish. The floor around her was littered with the remains of her beloved books, their pages ripped and scattered like confetti. The new special edition book, the one she had saved for months to buy, lay in ruins, its beautiful leather cover marred by jagged tears. The sight was like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Brooke's room, once a sanctuary of order and tranquility, now looked like a war zone. The shelves that had once held her prized collection were in disarray, with books knocked over and some even flung to the floor. The air was thick with the scent of paper and ink, but it was no longer comforting, it was suffocating, a reminder of the destruction that had taken place. Brooke's sobs were quiet but heart-wrenching, each one a testament to the depth of her pain. She was not a confrontational person by nature. She avoided conflict at all costs, preferring to retreat into the safety of her books rather than engage in arguments. Seeing her like this, so utterly broken, filled me with a fierce protectiveness that I hadn't felt in years. My eyes snapped to Mariah, who stood frozen in the corner of the room, her face a mask of guilt and fear. She clutched a torn page in her hand, her knuckles white, and her eyes darted between Brooke and me, searching for some kind of escape. Lindsay appeared in the doorway behind me, her expression a mix of confusion and concern, but I didn't have the patience to explain. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted, and I turned to Mariah, my voice sharp and unyielding. "What on earth were you thinking?" I demanded, my tone cutting through the tension like a knife. "Do you have any idea how much these books mean to Brooke? How much time and effort she's put into building this collection? And you just destroyed them." Mariah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her lower lip trembled, and she looked to her mother for support, but I wasn't finished. "You need to apologize to Brooke right now," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "And then you're going to clean up this mess. Every single page, Every single book you are going to fix this as best as you can. And after that, you are no longer welcome in this house. Do you understand me? Lindsay stepped forward, her face flushed with indignation. Whoa, hold on a second, she said, her voice rising. Mariah's just a kid. She didn't mean to do this. It was an accident. An accident. I shot back, my voice rising to match hers. She's 13 years old, Lindsay. She's old enough to know right from wrong. This wasn't an accident, this was deliberate. She knew exactly what she was doing. Lindsay's eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms over her chest. Well, if Brooke didn't want her books touched, maybe she shouldn't have left them out where anyone could get to them. Her words were like a spark to a powder keg. I felt my self-control snap, and I took a step toward her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. They weren't out, I said through gritted teeth. They were in her room. Her private space. A space that Mariah had no business being in without Brooke's permission. You know that as well as I do. Lindsay's face hardened, and she shook her head. You're overreacting. They're just books. It's not like she destroyed something irreplaceable. Just books. I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. These aren't just books to Brooke. They're her passion, her escape, her world. And some of them are irreplaceable. That special edition she just bought? It's sold out everywhere. She can't just go out and buy another one. And even if she could, it wouldn't be the same. You have no idea what you are talking about. Lindsay's jaw tightened, and she took a step closer to me, her eyes blazing. You're being ridiculous. You're acting like she committed a crime. She's a kid, for God's sake. Kids make mistakes. You're blowing this way out of proportion. And you're refusing to take responsibility, I shot back. Mariah destroyed Brooke's property, and she needs to face the consequences. That includes reimbursing her for the books she ruined. I expect you to pay Brooke back for what she's lost. Lindsay let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. You're seriously going to make me pay for a few torn books? You're being a greedy bitch, you know that. Her words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I was too stunned to respond. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost palpable. Brooke's sobs had quieted, but she still stood there, clutching the torn pages to her chest, her eyes wide with shock. Mariah looked like she wanted to disappear, her face pale and her hands trembling. Lindsay didn't wait for a response. She grabbed Mariah's arm and pulled her toward the door, her movements sharp and angry. Come on, we're leaving, she snapped, her voice cold. I'm not going to stand here and be insulted over something so stupid. I didn't try to stop them. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, and I knew that if I said anything else, it would only make things worse. I watched as Lindsay stormed out of the room, dragging Mariah behind her, and listened as their footsteps echoed down the stairs. The front door slammed shut with a finality that made me flinch, and then the house was silent once more. I turned back to Brooke, who was still standing in the middle of the room, her face streaked with tears. My heart ached for her, and I crossed the room in a few quick strides, pulling her into a tight embrace. She buried her face in my shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs, and I held her tightly, wishing I could take away her pain. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I whispered, my voice breaking. I'm so sorry. Brooke didn't respond, but she clung to me like a lifeline, her tears soaking into my shirt. I could feel the weight of her grief, and it broke my heart. Her books were more than just objects, they were a part of her, a reflection of who she was. And now, that part of her had been violated in the worst possible way. As I held her, my mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Lindsay's refusal to take responsibility had left me feeling helpless and angry, but I knew I couldn't let this go. Brooke deserved justice, and I was determined to make sure she got it. But as I stood there, comforting my daughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was about to change everything, not just for Brooke, but for our entire family. The storm had only just begun, and I had no idea how far its reach would extend. I told my husband about everything that happened, and he was fully supportive of me. He agreed that Lindsay should reimburse Brooke for the books she lost, especially because they were special, limited edition copies that Brooke will never be able to replace. These books had a lot of sentimental value to her, and losing them has really upset her. The whole situation has blown up more than I expected, and now my side of the family is telling me that I'm being too hard on Mariah, that she's just a kid and I should let it go. They think I should be more understanding, but I'm having a hard time seeing it that way. She completely destroyed my daughter's property, and the value of what she lost goes beyond just the monetary cost. I want her to understand that actions like this have real consequences, especially when they affect someone else's belongings in such a hurtful way. I've tried to be reasonable, but I don't think I should just brush it off. So, I'm really torn and asking here, was I the asshole for demanding that my sister pay me back for the books?